All right. What we've got here is the original three books of Dungeons and Dragons. The way it came out in 1974, and we're going to take a look inside. There's a lot to be learned by going back here, and a lot of what we call all the tropes of gaming is set by these three books. What we consider the tropes of gaming nowadays. Okay, the first book is Men and Magic. It is penned by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. It is the volume one of three booklets. And like I said, it came out in 1974, uh, the year after I graduated high school. And this is at that time it was considered expansion of the chainmail rules, which we all know chainmail was the wargaming rules that Dungeons and Dragons sprang from. And it was the Lake Geneva Tactical Study Rules Association that was putting out the chainmail rules, and then Dungeons and Dragons came around there. And this is very yellowed copy. It's very stained. The forward is by Gary Gygax, uh, and it almost sounds like Star Wars when it starts, because it was once upon a time, long, long ago, there was a little group known as the Castle and Crusade Society, and they were a group of war gamers that like to play fantasy miniatures and stuff. So that's where the forward is about, and Gygax wrote it. He actually wrote the forward in 1973, and he was talking about how the rules and everything, right? But it was it's a fascination of getting evidence that there's, he's talking about the influences like campaigns and Blackmore and the Greyhawk campaigns in Lake Geneva, and the rules that's where they wrote the rules from, was because there was a demand outside of those campaigns for people to read the rules. And he's talking about how the rules are strictly fantasy, and how his influences are John Burroughs' Martian Adventure, John Carter, and of course Howard's Conan Saga, and D. Camp, and Fritz Lieber's Fafhrd and Greymouser, and stuff, which caused the influences of stuff back then. It's all stuff I read, by the way, when I was a kid. And that's the forward by Gary Gygax. All right. And there's an introduction here. This is the introduction to Men and Magic. And let me show you what the required recommended equipment is for starting this game. Okay. Of course, you need your dice. You need 4 to 26-sided dice, one pair of 4-sided dice, one pair of 8-sided dice, one pair of 20-sided dice, and one pair of 12-sided dice. And the latest edition of Chainmail Rules, which will help you with the combat, right? But you also need a one 3-ring notebook, graph paper, sheet protectors, 3-ring lined paper, drafting equipment, scratch paper and pencils, imagination, a patient referee, and players. This is so early that they weren't even called dungeon masters back then. They were just called referees. And so it's talking about how the campaign gets started, and characters. The characters were just fighting man, magic users, and clerics back then. They didn't even have thieves. And the races were dwarves, elves, halflings. And then they didn't have the alignments either. They just had law, neutrality, and chaos as their alignment, which is this table here. So obviously they didn't have very good art either. So not like they are nowadays. And it says here, prior to character selection by players, it is necessary for the referee to roll 3 6-sided dice in order to rate and do various abilities. So if it has the referee rolling the dice for the character sheets here, okay, got the same abilities like we got nowadays: strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, charisma. And a lot of his stuff is pretty basic. Basic weapons, armor, equipment. And you have the experience points. And lo and behold, before there was Game Master screens, you had reference tables that came with this. And these were useful. And this is prior to ever had Game Master screens, which I imagine came along pretty quickly after this. And treasure tables and stuff. it's still, you can still see the foundation of what became the whole concept of role playing, and what came after these rules and what it grew into. You can see the foundations were set here with these referee sheets and stuff. And you got to understand, this was groundbreaking stuff in 1974. And got some all the common spells and things. So that's the first book. And boy, you didn't have character sheets back then. You had notebook paper and a few stats on notebook paper. And the second book is Monsters and Treasure. And you got all your common monsters from basic D&D and their encounters and stuff. And it's a pretty interesting book, pretty useful, I'd say, back then. And they decided to put some art on the inside cover here. You can sure tell this is like put together. I guess what I remember what the story is, that it was put together in like Gygax's garage or basement. They stapled the rules together themselves and started sending them out. And then you got your campaign rules and stuff right here. Not construction of castle keeps, which I imagine it was pretty influenced by chainmail wargaming rules. But this is the thing that explains everything, and this is the thing that turned the corner on me to understanding how role-playing games were played, because in the back of the rule book, it had an example of play. And when I read the example of play, I knew exactly how the game, what the whole concept of the game was. Up to that point, I was confused back in the early days in 1979. And it has an example of play where the caller, back then, D&D, you had a caller. You had one caller that spoke for the group, and you had a referee. And you had one person that spoke for the whole group, what their strategy is. And that didn't happen very long, I guarantee you. And then everybody started speaking. But you had a caller, and then you had a referee. And that example of play was very cool. It's got wilderness encounters. It's really cool. I mean, when you look at it now, it looks very amateurish, but you know what? It covered all the basics that we still deal with today on gaming. And so I thought you'd like to make a little look inside and of the three books here. And it's pretty cool. It's a step back in time, step back to where things began. They put art. Yeah, there's art on the inside cover. I never noticed that before. Elementals and bizarre art too, by the way, on those two covers. This is it. This is the three basic books. This is where it all began. And I thought you might like to take a little look back. We're going to be covering other parts of the history of role-playing games that I'm familiar with. And I'll see you on the next one. So, bye for now.